The cold. That was the first thing he felt. Not the kind of cold you feel when you step out into the yard in winter, a different kind. The cold of unfamiliar sheets and a stranger's body. His eyes opened, and the ceiling seemed too close. A low, wooden ceiling with patches of dampness. The smell of bark decoction and mouse droppings hit his nose. His hands lay on top of the blanket, and they weren't his hands. Thin, childlike, fingers like twigs of dry bamboo. He tried to clench his fist, and his hand trembled from the effort. He tried to stand up, and his body collapsed onto the floor like a sack of wet sand. His knees struck the floorboards. The pain was real, so this wasn't a dream. He tried again and fell again. On the third try, he simply sat down on the floor and stared at his palms for a long time. Small palms. The palms of an 8-year-old child. A thought rang out quietly and clearly in his mind. All right, he had lived 61 years in the body of a swordmaster. For 30 years, he had trained the Emperor's finest guards. He had earned the nickname, the Silent Blade of the Northern Passes. And now he was sitting on the floor in a child's body, unable to clench his fist. All right, he closed his eyes and tried to sense his body from within. A mana vessel. Every person in Huando is born with a vessel, and everything depends on its capacity. He found his vessel, and inside it grew quiet, almost empty. A single drop at the bottom of a well. With a vessel like that, in his past life as a boy, he wouldn't even have been accepted into school. With a vessel like that, he'd have been rejected here long ago. He could sense it in the smell of the room, in how far away the cup of water was from the bed, in how long it had been since anyone had changed the sheets. This child had already been buried alive. He opened his eyes, he stood up, he made his way to the window on wobbly legs and looked down. The courtyard. A small clan courtyard with trampled earth. Below, 4 children around 7 years old were swinging wooden swords under the watchful eye of an old man with a hunched back. He watched them for 10 seconds. The first boy strained his elbow as he swung. The second shifted his weight to his heels instead of his toes. The third was holding the sword like a shovel. The fourth girl was the best of them all, but she was hunching her left shoulder out of fear of being struck. The old instructor didn't see any of these mistakes. Or perhaps he saw them but didn't know how to correct them. He turned away from the window and sat down on the bed. His body was buzzing with weakness. Even the walk to the window and back had drained all his strength. But inside, a mechanism was already at work, one that hadn't rusted in 60 years. He had already done the math. 8 years old. The body is growing. The bones are still soft. The muscles aren't fully developed, but they aren't damaged either. No one had instilled bad habits in this body because no one had trained it seriously. A blank slate. The mana vessel is almost empty and will never become large, so he wouldn't be able to work with mana. But he hadn't planned to anyway. In the last 10 years of his previous life, his own mana reservoir had nearly dried up due to lung disease. And for 10 years, he'd developed a breeding system that allowed him to unleash 80% of a technique's power without a single drop of mana. Just rhythm, just the diaphragm, just the micropauses between inhalation and movement. No one in this world trains that way because everyone who has mana considers it beneath them. He smirked. The child's lips stretched in an unfamiliar way. Even smiling in this body was something he had to learn all over again. The door creaked. A woman in her 30s entered the room, a gaunt face, dark circles under her eyes. Her hair was tied into a simple knot without any adornments. But her posture, he noticed her posture right away. This woman had once been trained at a prestigious school. Her back was straight, her shoulders were squared, Her step was soft and precise. She was carrying a tray with liquid porridge and a cup of water. She saw that the boy was sitting up in bed, and her eyes widened. He had been lying there unconscious with a fever for 3 days. She set the tray down and knelt beside him. Her palms rested on his forehead, then on his cheeks, then back on his forehead. Her hands were trembling. She said that he'd been burning up for 3 days and that the doctor had already shaken his head. Her voice was steady, but her chin trembled. Mom. The word surfaced from the body's memory, not from his own memory, from the boy's memory. Ms. So Ha Yun, Nam Do Hwan's mother. She had married into a small mountain clan for love and had been struck from the records of her own lineage, the So clan, one of the 9 great clans of Hwando. He looked at her, and something unfamiliar stirred in his chest. In his past life, he had no mother. Or rather, he did, but he remembered her only by the smell of smoke and the sound of her cough. She died when he was 4. And this woman was kneeling before a sick child, checking his fever with her palms, and her hands were trembling. He picked up a spoon from the tray. His hand was shaking, but he brought the porridge to his mouth. He swallowed. The porridge was tasteless and watery. He ate 3 spoonfuls and set the bowl aside. She asked why he wasn't eating. He said he was full. His voice came out soft and hoarse. She pushed the bowl back toward him and said he had to finish it all. He looked at her with a long, lingering gaze that couldn't possibly belong to an 8-year-old child. Then he picked up the spoon and finished his meal. She smiled, his first smile in 3 days. When she left, he went back to the window. The courtyard was empty. The children had gone to lunch. The old mentor sat on a stone bench, rubbing his knees. Arthritis. He had about 2 more years of active training left. After that, he wouldn't be able to demonstrate the techniques anymore. The clan would lose its only teacher. He shifted his gaze further. Beyond the courtyard fence stretched a mountain valley. Yonggok, a narrow strip of land between 2 ridges. A few houses, rice fields on the hillside, a small blacksmith shop with smoke rising from it. This was the Nam clan. 300 years of history, 2 dead elders, 3 consecutive crop failures, a debt to the Order of the Crimson Lotus that grew with every season, and a single heir with an empty mana vessel, whom they must enter into the heirs tournament in 3 years. If the clan didn't field a fighter, their lands would go to the Lotus. If they did field one and lost, the lands would still go to the Lotus. All the adults in the clan had already resigned themselves to their fate. They were preparing to die with dignity. He turned away from the window, sat down on the floor, straightened his back, placed his palms on his knees, closed his eyes, and began to breathe. A slow inhale through the nose for a count of 4. Hold for 2. Exhale through the mouth for a count of 6. Again, again, again. Basic first-level breathing, the very thing he used to teach every recruit in the Imperial Guard, the very thing he would start with now. His body was weak. Good. A weak body can't lie. It will show exactly where the limit is. Strong students always cheated him during tests. Weak ones never did. He breathed for 20 minutes. Then the weakness made him feel sick, and he lay down on the floor. The ceiling swayed. The child's body couldn't even handle breathing exercises. But he smiled, because in those 20 minutes, he realized 3 things. First, his diaphragm is healthy. His lungs are clear. Unlike his previous body, this one doesn't have the disease that had been killing him for 10 years. Second, the body learns quickly. A child's muscles pick up the rhythm 3 times faster than an adult's. In a month, basic breathing will become automatic. Third, he doesn't have to do everything himself. In the courtyard are 4 children and an old mentor. The clan has warriors. There is a mother with the bearing of a swordswoman from the great clan. There is someone else. He doesn't know who yet, but he'll find out. He always has. For 60 years, he taught people. Not techniques, not moves. He taught them to see themselves. And he did it so quietly that they thought they'd taught themselves. He closed his eyes and drifted off to sleep. His last thought was simple. In his past life, he had died alone in the mountains with a cold teapot by his bed. In this life, there would be people around his bed. He would build everything necessary for that: a school, a clan, a home. But first, he must learn to breathe. For the next 5 days, Do Kwon didn't leave his room. His mother brought him food 3 times a day. His father stopped by in the evenings. Nam Sin Ho, the clan leader, a man of about 35 with heavy hands and a calm face. He would sit by the bed and say nothing. Sometimes he would place his hand on his son's head. Sometimes he would say that tomorrow would be better. Ta Kwon looked at him and could read everything. His father was afraid, not for his son, but for the clan. His shoulders bore a weight that would have been enough for 5 men. 2 dead elders, debts, empty granaries, and a son who had been burning with fever for 3 days after the vessel testing ritual. The ritual had revealed an almost empty vessel. For the clan, it was a death sentence. Ta Kwon ate. He slept. He breathed. 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the evening. His body couldn't hold out. On the 3rd day, he increased it to 25 minutes. On the 5th, to 30. Every time after training, he felt nauseous and lay down on the floor. But each time, the nausea came a little later. His body was learning. On the 6th day, he stepped out into the courtyard for the first time. It was a cold morning. The mountain air of the Yonggok Valley smelled of wet stone. The courtyard was empty. Training sessions didn't start until later. He walked around the perimeter. His legs were still trembling, but they were holding up. He stopped at the training posts, wooden posts as tall as an adult wrapped in rope. The rope was frayed. The posts stood crooked. 2 of the 5 were wobbly. He looked at the trampled ground of the courtyard. The left corner was softer. Water pooled there after it rained. The right side, near the wall, was firmer and slightly raised. Whoever stood on the right had an advantage in stability. Whoever stood on the left would slip during sudden movements. Not a single Nam clan instructor had noticed this. Or perhaps they had noticed, but didn't understand how to use it. He made a mental note of it. Then he found the armory, a small annex to the dojo. Inside, wooden swords of various sizes hung on racks. He took the smallest one, his hands barely wrapped around the hilt. To his small frame, the sword felt as heavy as a real blade would to an adult. He lifted it with both hands and made a single vertical slashing strike from top to bottom. The simplest movement in any school of swordsmanship. His arms began to buzz. His shoulders cramped up. He lowered the sword and stood there for a minute, catching his breath. 1 strike, 1 movement, and his body was already at its limit. He raised the sword again. 2nd strike. Worse than the first. The line was crooked, his elbows splayed apart. 3rd. Even worse. 4th. He stopped. 4 strikes. That was his current limit. Tomorrow, it would be 5. In a week, 10. In a month, 50. No more. Not any faster. He knew the price of rushing. In his past life, he'd seen dozens of talented students who burned themselves out in a year trying to jump higher than they could reach. Half of them crippled their bodies. A quarter lost their mana vessels from overload. The rest simply broke down inside. He wouldn't repeat their mistakes. He placed his sword on the rack and left the armory. People had already gathered in the courtyard. 3 boys and 1 girl, the very same students he'd seen from the window. And the old mentor, Nam Tae-yoon, his father's brother. He was in his 50s, thin, wiry, arthritis in his knees, a scar on his left forearm from an old wound that had never fully healed. His eyes were tired but alert. He noticed Du-hwan right away. The boy. "You're standing." His voice was rough but without malice. Tae-yoon approached and looked down at his nephew. There was sympathy in his gaze, not pity, the sympathy of a man who had trained honestly his whole life and achieved nothing. Who knew what it was like when one's capacity was limited and the world was closed off? Tak-hwan bowed and said he wanted to watch the training. Tae-yoon was silent for a moment. Then he nodded. He told the boy to sit by the wall and not get in the way. Do-hwan sat down on a stone bench by a column and began to watch. The training session lasted an hour. During that hour, he saw everything. The oldest of the boys, Nam Jin-woo, 14 years old, the best student of the younger generation. Tall for his age, long arms, a good mana vessel by the standards of the small clan. His strikes are powerful, his stance is correct. But his right shoulder is slightly higher than his left, an old habit. He always starts from the right side, and that makes him predictable. He also hates it when his opponent is silent. When the younger ones shout during an attack, Jin-woo remains calm. When they're silent, he gets nervous and speeds up. And when he speeds up, he loses his distance. The second boy, 10 years old. He's copied Jin-woo's technique but lacks his strength. He repeats the older boy's movements without understanding why they're necessary. The third boy, 9 years old, the youngest of the group. A left-hander who was retrained to use his right hand. His whole body is twisted from unnatural movements. In 2 years, he'll have chronic back pain if this isn't corrected now. A girl, 8 years old, just like Du-hwan, Nam Da-som, his sister in this body. He recognized her from the boy's memories. Small, skinny. Her pigtail had slipped to one side after the first exercise. She was holding the wooden sword incorrectly, but she was the only one who didn't tense her shoulders out of fear. She wasn't afraid of getting hit. She was afraid of not being able to strike first. That was valuable. Tae-yoon led the training conscientiously. He knew the basics. He knew the stances. He knew the order of the exercises. But he taught everyone the same way. One program for all 4 of them. The exact same movements for left and right-handers. The same pace for a 14-year-old and an 8-year-old. It wasn't his fault. That's how he'd been taught. The entire Hwando world taught this way. A standard program, a standard set of techniques. Those who couldn't keep up were weeded out. Du-hwan watched, and inside him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a very long time quietly welled up. A tingling in his fingertips. A desire to step forward. To take the boy, a left-hander, by the wrist, and turn his hand 3 fingers to the right. To show Jin-woo how to lower his right shoulder for 1 breath before attacking. To tell the girl with the pigtail that she's doing everything right and that she just needs to strike faster. But he sat there, silent, watching. He couldn't. A child who quotes military treatises is either a demon or possessed. In Hwangdo, the possessed were burned in the town square. He had to be careful. Very careful. After practice, Da-som ran up to him. She grabbed his hand. She said he'd finally gotten back on his feet and that her mom had cried every day while he was sick. Then she demanded that he braid her hair because it had gotten all messy again. Du-hwan looked at her. 6 years old. Big, sparkling eyes. A nose covered in dust. Scraped knees. In his past life, he had neither children nor a family. He'd been teaching other people's children for 30 years, and not once had he braided a single one of their pigtails. He took her hair and began to braid it. His fingers wouldn't obey him. The pigtail came out crooked and loose. Desome said he braided worse than Mom. Then she hugged him and ran out into the yard. He sat on the bench and watched her go. His chest felt warm, an unfamiliar, strange warmth that had nothing to do with style, technique, or practice. Just warmth. That evening at dinner, he sat between his father and mother. Desome sat across from him, swinging her legs under the table. His father ate in silence. His mother served food into Do Hwan's bowl. A typical dinner for a small mountain clan. Rice, vegetables, a little salted fish. He ate and watched his father. Nam Sin Ho was holding his chopsticks incorrectly. The strain was on his wrist instead of his fingers. A minor detail. But this minor detail indicated that his right hand was losing mobility, most likely due to an old injury he hadn't treated. Between bites, Do Hwan pointed out that his father was holding his chopsticks incorrectly, that the strain was on his wrist, and that if he didn't correct it, in 5 years his right hand wouldn't function as well in combat. The table fell silent. My father looked at him. My mother looked at him. Desome stopped wiggling her feet. My father slowly shifted his gaze to his own hand, then to his son, then at his wife. Then he gave Do Hwan a light tap on the forehead. It didn't hurt, but it stung. And he said that little boys should eat, not teach their father how to hold chopsticks. Desome laughed. His mother hid her smile behind her bowl. Do Hwan rubbed his forehead and continued eating. But he noticed. A minute later, his father quietly repositioned the chopsticks in his hand. He shifted his fingers slightly. The strain was lifted from his wrist. He didn't say anything. He just did it. Do Hwan lowered his gaze to his bowl and allowed himself a small smile. The first lesson. A master doesn't teach with words. A master creates the conditions under which the student learns on his own, even if the student is his own father in this new life. That night, he sat on the floor of his room again and breathed. 30 minutes. His body was already getting used to it. The nausea didn't set in until the 25th minute. Progress. Small, but real. He lay down and closed his eyes. Tomorrow, 5 sword strikes. In a week, 10. In a month, his first sparring match. He already knew who it would be against. Nam Jin Woo, the clan's best student. His right shoulder is higher than his left. He hates silence in battle. He speeds up when he gets nervous. He loses his distance when he speeds up. 20 seconds of dodging, 1 step forward, 1 touch to the throat. But not now. First, the body. First, the breath. First, learn to braid his sister's hair so she wouldn't say, "Mom does it better." A month had passed. Do Hwan counted the days by the notches on the doorframe. 32 days since he woke up. His body was changing, slowly, almost imperceptibly to those around him. But he felt every change. His breathing exercises had increased to 45 minutes without nausea. Sword strikes, 30 in the morning, each more precise than the last. A vertical downward slash. The same strike 32 days in a row. He wouldn't move on to the next one until this one was perfect. In his past life, he'd made the new recruits in the Guard practice a single strike for 3 months. Half of them quit after a week. Those who stayed became the best. He ran, every morning before dawn, 3 laps around the courtyard, then 4, then 5. His knees ached, his ankles throbbed. He knew which pain was normal and which was dangerous. Normal pain meant his muscles were working. Dangerous pain meant his joints were breaking. He stayed strictly on the edge. No one saw his morning workouts. He woke up before dawn and finished before the courtyard woke up. Only once did Desome wake up early and find him in the courtyard. He said he couldn't sleep and had been taking a walk. She yawned and asked him to braid her hair. The braid turned out better, straighter. But Desome still said her mom braided it better. He trained. This month, he watched Jin Woo every day. The 14-year-old boy trained hard. 2 hours in the morning, 2 in the evening. Sweat poured down in torrents. His stances were correct. His strikes were powerful. But his right shoulder, every single time, his right shoulder, it would rise before the attack, giving away his intention half a second before the strike itself. Taiyun didn't see it. Or maybe he did, but didn't know how to explain it. Dokwon waited. On the 32nd day, he approached Jin Woo after evening practice. Jin Woo was sitting on a bench drinking water. His shirt was soaked with sweat. His right shoulder was red from overexertion. Dokwon stood in front of him and said he wanted to spar. Jin Woo looked down at him. An 8-year-old boy with thin arms stood before the clan's best student. The courtyard wasn't empty yet. 2 younger boys were fiddling with the stands. Taiyun stood by a column with a cup of tea. Jin Woo sighed. He said, "All right, just be careful, little brother." They stood facing each other. Jin Woo took the training sword with his usual grip, a wide stance, right foot forward, sword at his right shoulder. Classic. Dokwon picked up the smallest wooden sword and assumed a stance that no one here recognized. Low, knees bent more than usual, chin down, left hand behind his back, center of gravity low. He'd devised this stance 40 years ago for a student who was half the size of his opponents. That student later became the commander of the 3rd Guard Regiment. Taiyun, standing by the column, frowned. He didn't recognize the stance. No one would have. Jin Woo frowned too. Something about the little boy's posture was wrong. Not weak, just wrong. Like a door that opens the wrong way. Jin Woo stepped forward and struck. A horizontal chop. Fast. Powerful. From the left, not the right. Dokwon noted this. His right shoulder ached from training, so Jin Woo started with his left side. Predictable. Dokwon shifted half a step to the right. The sword missed. Jin Woo struck again, a diagonal strike from above. Dokwon stepped back a quarter of a step. The sword sliced through the air right in front of his nose. The 3rd strike, a thrust. Faster than the previous ones. Jin Woo was picking up speed. That meant he was nervous. Dokwon remained silent. He didn't shout, he didn't hiss, he didn't groan. He just moved. Half a step, a quarter of a step. Sometimes he simply turned his torso and the sword passed a centimeter from his ribs. 20 seconds. Jin Woo struck 7 times. Not a single one landed. Sweat streamed down his face. He clenched his teeth and sped up even more. The 8th strike. The 9th. 10th. Each one harder and faster. Each one missed. Dokwon moved like water around a rock. He wasn't dodging. He simply wasn't standing where the sword was headed. At the 25th second, Jin Woo swung for a powerful strike. With both hands. From above. With his whole body. His feet left the ground for a split second. That was a mistake. You can't change direction in mid-air. Dokwon stepped forward. One small step. Into the gap. Into the space where Jin Woo's long training sword couldn't reach. Too close. The blade flew past Dokwon's back, and the small wooden sword in the 8-year-old boy's hands was already touching Jin Woo's throat. Lightly. Almost gently. Like a teacher adjusting a student's collar. The courtyard fell silent. The younger boys at the stands stopped fidgeting. Taiyun stood by a column with a cup of tea halfway to his mouth. Jin Woo stood motionless, the wooden blade at his throat, his eyes wide open. He didn't understand what had happened. He'd struck 10 times. Not once had he landed a hit. An 8-year-old boy with an empty mana vessel had circled him like a stream flows around a rock and touched his throat. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Then Du-hwan lowered his sword. He took a step back. He bowed. He thanked him for the sparring match. His voice was steady, His breathing was almost unbroken. He turned and walked to the bench. He sat down. Inside, everything was burning with tension. His body was at its limit. His legs were shaking. His hands were shaking. 30 seconds of sparring had taken more out of him than an hour of breathing exercises. But on the outside, he sat calmly. That too was part of the art. Never show how much it cost. Taiyun slowly set his cup down on the column's railing. He looked at his nephew. His face was stony. He'd been training for 50 years, honestly, every single day. And he hadn't achieved anything remarkable. And now, the 8-year-old boy he'd taken pity on a month ago at the dojo door had done what Taiyun couldn't have done even in his prime. He'd read the clan's best student in 30 seconds and dissected him like a textbook. Taiyun approached Du Huan. He stood before him. He was silent for 10 seconds. Then he said one word. "Boy, come here." And he led him into the dojo, not as a student, not as an heir, as someone he didn't yet understand but needed to see more closely. The dojo was empty and cool. The wooden floor was worn smooth by thousands of footsteps. The walls were bare. An old scroll with hieroglyphs hung on the far wall. The Way of the Nam clan. 300 years of history on yellowed paper. Taiyun closed the door. He sat down on the floor across from Du Huan. He looked him in the eyes and asked where he was from. Du Huan was ready for this question. He had rehearsed the answer for 3 weeks. He said he'd had a dream, that when he'd been sick and running a fever for 3 days, an old man had come to him, in a dream. The old man had shown him things, how to stand, how to breathe, how to look. He didn't know who this old man was, maybe his grandfather, maybe a clan ancestor. Taiyun was silent. He just watched. Du Huan held his gaze. It wasn't difficult. He'd held the gaze of generals and ministers for 60 years. The gaze of an old man with bad knees was no problem. Taiyun stood up. He walked over to the weapons rack in the corner of the dojo. He took out a wooden sword that fit his size. He turned to the boy. "Show me," he said. Taiyun assumed his stance. Wide, classic, feet shoulder-width apart, sword held vertically in front of him. Do Kwon watched him for 10 seconds and saw everything. The arthritis in his right knee was worse than in his left. That meant there would be a split-second delay when turning to the right. His left wrist was turned slightly inward, an old habit. Because of it, a horizontal strike from the left always landed 2 fingers below the target. A scar on his left forearm meant the muscle beneath it wasn't functioning fully. His left-hand block was 1/3 weaker. His breathing was steady, but shallow. Taiyun was breathing from his chest rather than his diaphragm. This meant that after 30 seconds of active combat, he would start to gasp for air. 50 years of training, every day, honestly, and not a single instructor had ever told him he was breathing incorrectly. Do Kwon didn't fight back. He lowered his sword. He set it down on the floor. He looked Taiyun in the eyes and said that his uncle's right knee hurt, that his left wrist was twisted inward, that the scar on his forearm was getting in the way of his block, and that he was breathing from his chest instead of his abdomen. Taiyun stood motionless. The sword slowly dropped. His face turned gray. Not from anger, from something else. 50 years. He'd been training for 50 years, and only now had an 8-year-old boy listed everything that was wrong with him in 10 seconds. Everything he'd felt every day but couldn't put into words. The pain in his knee that he'd chalked up to age. The weak block that he'd considered his limit. The shortness of breath he'd hidden from his students. Taiyun sat down on the floor. He set his sword aside. He was silent for a minute. Then he asked what he should do. Do Kwon sat down across from him. He thought for a moment. In his past life, he would have answered right away. He had ready-made training programs for dozens of body types and injuries. But now he had to respond like a child who dreamed of an old man. He said he could show him how to breathe properly. If he breathed from his stomach instead of his chest, his shortness of breath would go away in 2 months. He couldn't cure his knee, but he could show him how to move so that the strain wouldn't put pressure on it. That his wrist could be fixed in 3 weeks if he did one simple exercise every evening. Taiyun listened. Every word. He absorbed it like dry earth absorbs water. When Du Huan finished, the elder remained silent for another minute. Then he nodded. He said he would come here in the morning before dawn, and that the boy would show him. Du Huan nodded. That's how the morning sessions began, every day at the dojo before dawn. Taiyun arrived first, Du Huan second. The boy demonstrated. The old man repeated the movements. They didn't talk any more than necessary. Breathing, stances, weight shifting. The basics that Taiyun had considered simple turned out to be more difficult than any technique. After a week, Taiyun stopped gasping for breath after 30 seconds. After 2 weeks, his left-hand block became a quarter stronger. His wrist began to straighten. He didn't say anything, but Du Huan could see his face changing in the mornings. The fatigue was fading. Something else was taking its place. Something resembling hope. It was dangerous. Taiyun was starting to believe in the boy, and the boy couldn't explain where he got the knowledge he possessed. Dreams. The old man in his dreams. That lie had worked once, twice. But if the boy continued to display knowledge impossible for an 8-year-old, sooner or later, someone would ask serious questions. And then there were 2 options: a demon or a possessed child. Both end in fire. Du Huan understood this and held himself back. He gave Taiyun exactly as much as could be explained by the intuition of a gifted child, not a drop more. But even that single drop changed everything. 3 weeks after their morning sessions began, Taiyun went to see his older brother, Du Huan's father, Nam Sung Ho, the head of the Nam clan. Du Huan didn't hear the conversation, but he saw his father come out into the courtyard afterward. He stood by the training posts. He looked for a long time at his son, who was sitting on a bench watching the younger students. Then he walked over. He sat down beside him. He was silent for a moment. And then he said that Taiyun was asking for permission to let the boy help the younger students. Not to teach them, just to help, to show them specific things. Du Huan waited. His father looked at him. There was fear in his eyes, not for his son, but for the clan. If the boy showed talent, rumors would spread. The major clans would hear about it. They'd come. They'd take him away. Or worse. But the clan needed something. Anything. In 3 years, the heirs tournament would take place. If the clan didn't field a fighter, it would all be over. His father said, "All right, help him, but keep it quiet. No prying eyes." Do Kwon nodded. The next day, for the first time, he stood beside Taiyun during the juniors' training session. Not as a teacher, as an assistant. He approached the left-handed boy. He took his wrist. Silently, he turned his hand 3 fingers to the right. The boy looked at him, confused. Then he threw a punch, and the punch came out straight. Straight for the first time in a year. The boy looked at his own hand as if it were someone else's. To Kwon approached the second boy, the one who was copying Jin Woo. He positioned him in a stance slightly narrower than usual. He shifted his left foot back by half a foot. The boy tried a strike from the new stance, and his body stopped creaking. The movement became his own, not a copy of someone else's. Taiyun stood and watched. He saw how, in 10 minutes, the boy had accomplished what would have taken him a month, and he didn't know what to feel. Gratitude, shame, joy for his students, bitterness toward himself. All at once. He bottled it up inside and continued leading the training session. Because he was a good person. Because his students were more important than his pride. But Du Huan saw it. He always saw it. And he knew he had to be careful with this. Tai Yun isn't an enemy, but the wounded pride of a master who never became a master is a time bomb with a long fuse. It can't be ignored. A week later, Du Huan found his moment. One evening after practice, when Tai Yun was washing the floor in the dojo alone, the boy walked in. He picked up a rag and started helping. They washed the floor in silence. Then Du Huan said that his uncle does one thing better than anyone else in the clan. Tai Yun looked at him. Du Huan said that his uncle isn't afraid to show his students when he's wrong. That when his uncle makes a mistake during training, he doesn't hide it. He stops and demonstrates it again. Honestly, that's rare. Most teachers hide their mistakes. They're afraid their students will lose respect for them. But students don't lose respect for an honest teacher. They lose respect for a coward. Tai Yun was silent. The rag froze in his hand. He stared at the wet floor, then at the boy, then back at the floor. His jaw clenched. His eyes flashed. He turned away abruptly and began mopping the floor faster. But Du Huan noticed. His old shoulders straightened slightly. His back straightened by a centimeter. That was enough. Enough for today. He left. He left Tai Yun alone in the dojo. Sometimes a master must leave so that a student can be alone with what he has heard. At home, Dasom was waiting at the doorway. She demanded her pigtail. He braided it, neater than yesterday. Dasom twirled in front of the mirror. She said it was almost like Mom's. Almost. Progress. The second month. Do Kwon established a routine. Dawn. Breathing exercises for 45 minutes. Sword strikes. Now 2 types, vertical and horizontal, 30 of each. Running. 7 laps around the courtyard. Then breakfast with the family. Then morning training with the younger ones. Then an hour of rest, during which he lay on a bench in the courtyard and pretended to be asleep. In reality, he was listening. The Nam clan was small, and conversations carried across the courtyard like the smell of fried fish. He learned a great deal. The clan's debt to the Order of the Crimson Lotus amounted to 400 silver coins. A laughable sum for a great clan. For the Nam clan, it was insurmountable. 3 consecutive crop failures had devastated the treasuries. The 2 elders who had died of illness were the only ones who handled trade affairs. After their deaths, the clan lost its connections to 3 trade routes. The mine on the northern slope, which produced iron ore, was operating at a quarter of its capacity because half the workers had left for the city. Only the elderly and the children remained. Dokfan lay on a bench with his eyes closed, piecing together the picture. The clan wasn't dying from a single blow. It was dying from 1,000 tiny cuts. Each one, on its own, wasn't fatal, but together, they had already killed the clan. It was just that the body hadn't fallen yet. He couldn't solve everything at once. He was an 8-year-old boy. Even with 60 years of memories, he couldn't go to his father and say, "Here's the plan to save the clan." They would have patted him on the head and sent him to bed. So he had to act differently. Through other people. Through small things. Through things that look like coincidences but are actually carefully calculated. The first small thing. The training yard. Du Huan asked Tae-yun to rearrange the training posts. Not all of them, just 2. Move the left post 3 steps to the right one 2 steps forward. He explained that it would be more convenient for the younger students. Tae-yun shrugged and rearranged them. At the next practice, the younger students stopped bumping into each other during partner drills. The space between the posts created natural corridors for movement. The students moved more freely. They got in each other's way less. Practice became a third more effective. No one noticed why. The second minor detail: a left-handed boy. His name was Nam Yu Jin, 10 years old. He had been retrained to use his right hand 2 years ago because there were no left-handed instructors in the clan, and no one knew how to teach a left-hander. His body was lopsided. His spine was beginning to curve. Do Hwan spoke with Tae-yeon in private. He said the boy needed to go back to using his left hand. That retraining was destroying his body. Tae-yeon asked who would teach him. A left-handed technique differs from a right-handed one in every movement. Do Hwan said he would show him. Tae-yeon looked at him intently for a long moment. Then he nodded. The next day, Yu Jin received permission to hold the sword in his left hand. The boy couldn't believe it. For 2 years, he'd been scolded for every attempt to hold the sword in his left hand. He stood in the middle of the courtyard with the sword in his left hand, not knowing what to do. Do Hwan approached. He stood beside him. He took his small wooden sword in his left hand. He was right-handed in both lives, but 30 years of training with the guards had taught him to use both hands. He showed Eugene a stance, a simple, basic one, a mirror image of the usual right-handed stance. Left foot forward, sword at the left shoulder. Eugene repeated it, and his body relaxed. For the first time in 2 years, his back straightened. His shoulders settled evenly. His breathing deepened. His body stopped resisting itself. Eugene struck. The blow was clean, even, stronger than any he'd ever delivered with his right hand. The boy looked at his hand, then at Do Hwan. His eyes were wet. Do Hwan said nothing. He patted him on the shoulder and walked away. The third little thing, Dasom. Her sister trained with everyone else, but Do Hwan could see that Taeyun's program wasn't right for her. She was faster than the others, but physically weaker. The standard exercises for striking power held back her main advantage, speed. He didn't openly change her program. Instead, every night before bed, he played a game with her. He would throw her a small ball sewn from rags, and she had to catch it. Slowly at first, then faster. Then he'd throw 2 balls at once. Dasom would squeal with delight and dart around the room catching the balls. Her mother watched from the doorway and smiled. A sweet game. An older brother playing with his younger sister. No one realized that every throw was training her reaction time and hand-eye coordination. That after a month of these games, Dasom would be catching the ball without looking. And in half a year, her reaction time would be faster than Jinwoo's. The fourth small detail, her mother. Ms. So Ha-yeon. Do Hwan had been watching her from day one. Her posture, her gait, her hands as she chopped vegetables, precise, swift movements without a single superfluous gesture. This woman was a warrior, not just a student, a warrior of the So clan, one of the 9 great clans. She had left the clan for love and been struck from the roles, but the body remembers. Muscle memory cannot be erased. Every day, she chopped vegetables with movements derived from the So clan's sword technique, the heavenly technique, passed down only through blood. In his past life, Do Kwon had seen this technique 3 times. On the battlefield, from afar, beautiful and deadly as lightning in a clear sky. And now, fragments of it lived on in the hands of a woman chopping carrots in the kitchen of a mountain clan. He didn't tell her. Not yet. It was too soon. If her mother found out that her son saw a warrior in her, she would be frightened. She had fled that life. She didn't want to go back. But when the time comes, and then He'll ask her to show him how she cuts vegetables, and she'll understand. The days passed. Training continued. His body grew stronger. In the 6th week, Do Kwon ran 10 laps around the courtyard without stopping for the first time. In the 7th, he made 50 sword strikes in the morning. In the 8th, he began the 3rd type of strike, the agonizing one. He practiced each new strike until it became second nature before moving on to the next. His muscles memorized the movements. His tendons adjusted. His bones grew denser. Slowly, correctly, without overexertion. The younger students' results were also improving. Tae-yoon continued to lead the training as before, but now, after each session, Do-hwan would quietly approach one or two of them and correct the small details. The wrist, the foot, the angle of the strike. 2 months later, 2 of the younger boys had surpassed their results from the previous year in the basic endurance tests. Eugene, a left-hander, had covered in 6 weeks a distance that usually takes half a year. His strikes had become clean and confident. His back had straightened. He had stopped slouching. Da-som caught the ball with her eyes closed. Tae-yoon saw it all, and 2 feelings clashed inside him. The first, joy. His students were growing. The clan was coming back to life. The children he had considered hopeless were achieving results he hadn't even dared to dream of. The second, bitterness. They weren't growing because of him. It was because of the boy, an 8-year-old boy who, in 2 months, had done more for these children than he had in 10 years. Tae-yoon didn't speak of this. He was a strong man, honest. But Do-hwan saw how, in the evenings, the elder would sit alone in the dojo, how he would stare at his hands, how he would clench and unclench his fists. Do-hwan knew. He'd seen it before. In a past life, he'd had dozens of teachers like that, people who gave everything and received little in return, who trained honestly and never achieved their students had achieved. The bitterness of a master who never became a master is a poison that acts slowly. It doesn't kill right away. It eats away at you from the inside over the years, and if you don't intervene in time, it turns a good person into a broken one. Do-hwan decided he wouldn't let that happen. Tae-yoon was needed by the clan, not as a fighter, but as a person, as a pillar, as the one who opens the dojo every day, mops the floor, and waits for the students. Without him, the clan would fall apart long before the tournament. In the 9th week, Do-hwan came to Tae-yoon in the morning and said he needed help. Tae-yoon asked what with. Do-hwan said he knew certain things, separate things, pieces, snippets, how to stand, how to breathe, how to look. But he doesn't know how to turn these bits and pieces into a complete training session. He doesn't know how to plan the week, how to alternate between exertion and rest, how to lead a group. Uncle knows that, because Uncle has been doing it every day for 10 years. Tae-yoon remained silent. Do-hwan continued. He said that Uncle sees things he doesn't see. Uncle knows every student. He knows who's tired, who's hungry, who had a fight with their parents and came to practice angry. You can't see that in 10 seconds. You can only see it if you're there every day, year after year. Tae-yoon stood motionless. His face was expressionless. But Do-hwan saw his hands. His fists slowly unclenched. His fingers relaxed. His back, which had been starting to slump again over the past few weeks, straightened. Tae-yoon said, "All right." And they began working together. Not teacher and assistant, not master and student. 2 people who know different things and, together, know more than they do separately. This was Do-hwan's first real partnership in his new life, and the most important one. The 3rd month. Do-hwan changed the training schedule. Not on his own, through Tae-yoon. He suggested to his uncle that they divide the students into 2 groups, the older ones separately, the younger ones separately. Before, everyone had trained together, and the younger ones had tried to keep up with the older ones, sacrificing technique for speed. Now each group worked at its own pace. Taiyun led the older ones. Du Huan helped with the younger ones. His father approved, silently, with a nod. Jinwoo changed after the sparring match. Not right away. The first week, he avoided Du Huan. He'd walk past without looking. He'd sit at the other end of the courtyard. A 14-year-old boy had lost to an 8-year-old, and the whole courtyard had seen it. The shame was worse than any blow. In the second week, Du Huan found him in the dojo late at night. Jinwoo was practicing his stance, the same one, over and over. His shirt was soaked, his hands were raw and calloused, his right shoulder twitched with every swing. He was trying to correct what Do Kwon had shown him in 30 seconds. He tried to lower his shoulder, but he couldn't. His body remembered the old habit and resisted. Do Kwon entered quietly. He sat down by the wall. He said nothing. Jinwoo kept practicing his stance for another 10 minutes. Then he stopped. Sweat dripped from his chin. He turned to the boy. His eyes were red. Not from tears, from exhaustion. He said he couldn't do it, that his shoulder wouldn't go down, that he'd tried 100 times and it kept popping back up on its own every time. Do Kwon stood up. He walked over. He reached out and placed his hand on Jinwoo's right shoulder. A child's hand on a teenager's shoulder. He pressed down, gently, and said the problem wasn't with the shoulder. The problem was with the neck. Jinwoo tenses his neck before striking, and that pulls his shoulder up. He needs to relax his neck, not the shoulder, the neck. Jinwoo blinked. He turned back to his stance. He relaxed his neck. He threw a punch. His shoulder stayed down. The strike was smooth and clean, stronger than before. Jinwoo struck again. And again. 5 strikes in a row, each with his shoulder down. He stopped and looked at his hands. Then at Do Kwon. Then back at his hands. He sat down on the floor. He set the sword down beside him. He was silent for a minute. Then he asked how the boy knew such things. Do Kwon gave his usual answer. Dreams. An old man in a dream. Jinwoo shook his head. He said he didn't believe in dreams, but if the boy didn't want to talk, he wouldn't ask. Then he paused again and asked if the boy could teach him some more. Do Kwon nodded. Starting that evening, Jinwoo came to the dojo after the main training session. For an hour, just him and Do Kwon. The boy demonstrated. The teenager repeated the moves. In 3 weeks, Jinwoo corrected 4 major flaws in his technique. His strikes became a third faster. His stance was more stable. His footwork was more efficient. He stopped wasting energy on unnecessary movements. Taiyun noticed the changes. He asked Jinwoo what had happened. Jinwoo blushed and said he was just training more. Taiyun looked across the courtyard at Do Huan. Do Huan was sitting on a bench with Das and braiding her hair, an innocent scene. Taiyun said nothing. In the 10th week, what Du Huan had been waiting for and fearing happened. Strangers arrived. 2 men from the neighboring Min clan, a small clan, slightly larger than the Nam clan. They came to discuss the pasture boundary, a routine visit. But one of them, Min Dong-hyun, was 32 years old, a former student at a 3rd-rank provincial school, an average fighter, but with a keen eye. He happened to see the younger one's evening training and stopped by the fence. He watched for 5 minutes. Then he walked on. At dinner with the head of the Nam clan, he casually remarked that the Nam students looked pretty good this year, that the juniors' basic technique was cleaner than their own. My father took the compliment in stride, but after dinner, he came to see Du Huan. He sat down next to the bed. He was silent for a long time. Then he said that the guest had noticed, and if a guest from the Min clan had noticed, others would too. Rumors spread fast. Du Huan replied that this was inevitable. If the students were improving, people would see it. It was impossible to hide. They couldn't stop training either. There were 2.5 years until the heirs tournament. If the Nom clan didn't prepare its fighters, it would lose everything. His father was silent for a moment. Then he said that the boy spoke like an adult. Do Kwon felt a chill in his stomach, a dangerous thing to say. He immediately added that he was just repeating what he'd heard from Uncle Tae-yoon, that his uncle was always talking about the tournament. His father nodded. He accepted the explanation, or at least pretended to accept it. That night, Du Hwan lay awake, lost in thought. He was walking a tightrope. On one hand, he had to prepare the clan for survival. On the other, he couldn't draw attention to himself. On one hand, he had to demonstrate his knowledge. On the other, he couldn't reveal too much. One wrong step, and the rope would snap. In his past life, he hadn't needed to hide. He was So Gyong-ho, the silent blade. His name opened doors and silenced tongues. In this life, he was an 8-year-old boy with an empty mana vessel in a dying clan on the edge of a mountain valley. And if someone important looked at him too closely, it would all be over. In the morning, he got up before dawn. He went out into the courtyard. He breathed. He stood at attention. He ran. Just like every day, routine was his anchor, his salvation. As long as his body was working, his mind didn't panic. In the 12th week, a letter arrived, by pigeon post from the city of Cheongju, from a fabric merchant to whom the Nom clan owed money for 2 years. The merchant demanded payment, 80 silver coins. His father read the letter at breakfast. His expression didn't change, but the chopsticks in his hand trembled. His mother looked at him. They exchanged a glance that lasted a second, but spoke louder than an hour-long conversation. Do Kwon saw it. 80 coins. The clan didn't even have 20 in circulation. The mine on the northern slope produced ore, but the income went toward food and the bare necessities. There was no surplus. The merchant wouldn't wait. If the clan didn't pay, he would turn to a middleman. And middlemen in Hwando were most often people connected to the major clans or to the Order of the Crimson Lotus. The debt would become a lever. Someone would buy the Nom clan's debt and gain the right to pressure them. Do Kwon finished his breakfast. He went out into the courtyard. He sat down on a bench. He closed his eyes and began to think. Money. In his past life, he hadn't dealt with money. He had been a master swordsman. Money was someone else's concern. But he had served at the emperor's court for 30 years. He had seen how the army's finances worked, how expenses were calculated, how they saved money, how they found money where there was none. The clan needed someone who knew how to count. Not a warrior, an accountant. Someone who would look at a mine and say how to increase revenue. Who would look at expenses and point out where there were leaks. We didn't have such a person in the Nom clan. But Do Kwon knew one thing about the Yonggok Valley that no one else had noticed. A mountain spring on the eastern slope. Pure water with a mineral flavor. The locals had been drinking from it their whole lives without realizing its value. But in his past life, Do Hwan had been to the capital. He had seen how the capital's apothecaries sold mineral water for silver. A bottle of pure mountain water with the right mineral composition cost more in the capital than a bottle of rice wine. He couldn't go to his father and say, "Sell the water." An 8-year-old boy couldn't possibly know about prices in the capital. But he could nudge things in the right direction. That evening at dinner, he asked his mother why the water from the spring tasted better than the water from the well. His mother explained that in the spring, the water flows through the bedrock and absorbs minerals. Do Kwon asked if other people drank it that way too. His mother said that in cities, people buy mineral water with money. She knew this because she had grown up in a large clan. His father looked up. He looked at his wife. People buy mineral water with money. His mother fell silent. Then she looked at her husband. Then at the spring outside the window, 500 steps up the slope. Do Kwon lowered his eyes to his bowl and continued eating. The seed has been planted. From here on, it will sprout on its own. The 4th month. The idea about the water had taken root. Father remained silent for 3 days after that dinner. On the 4th day, he went to the nearest city, Cheongju. He took 10 bottles of water from the spring with him. He returned 2 days later with empty bottles and 14 silver coins. He placed the coins on the table and stared at them for a long time. The apothecary in Cheongju tasted the water and said it was better than what they brought from the southern mountains. He was willing to buy it regularly, 30 bottles a month, at 1.5 silver coins per bottle. 45 silver coins a month. In 2 months, the clan would pay off its debt to the cloth merchant and still have money left over. At dinner, his mother smiled for the first time in a long while. Dasom didn't understand why everyone was so happy, but she rejoiced along with them. Do Kwon ate in silence. 45 silver coins a month isn't wealth. It's a lifeline that keeps a drowning man from sinking to the bottom. But for now, it's enough. Training continued. His body grew stronger. By the end of the 4th month, Do Kwon was making 80 sword strikes every morning. 4 types of strikes: vertical, horizontal, diagonal, upward. Each was drilled until it became second nature. His body remembered. His muscles remembered. He took his time. He didn't need to know 100 strikes. He needed to know the 4 strikes that always worked. Running, 12 laps. Breathing, an hour without a break. The child's body was changing, slowly, but Do Kwon saw what others could not. Muscle density, not size, density. His arms remained slender, but beneath the skin, there was a firmness that hadn't been there before. His tendons had strengthened. His reflexes had improved. He could now catch the ball Dasom threw without looking and throw it right back into her palm. In the 5th month, a skirmish broke out. The Nam clan's supply convoy was returning from Cheongju with provisions. 4 carts, 2 cart drivers, 1 guard. Old Park, 50 years old. A former soldier from a provincial garrison, a saber on his belt, arthritis in his left shoulder. They were stopped at the mountain pass. 3 men, adult men, not bandits from the woods, too well dressed, too confident. The swords at their belts weren't for show. They were mercenaries. Someone had sent them to intercept the convoy, or to check it out, or just to scare them. Do Kwon was in the convoy. He had begged to go with his father to the city. His father didn't want to take him, but Dasom made such a fuss that his father gave in and took them both. Dasom fell asleep in the wagon an hour later and slept the whole way. Do Kwon sat next to the driver and watched the road. When 3 figures emerged onto the pass, he saw them 200 paces away, before the driver did, before Old Pak did. 3 men. The first one, tall, a long sword on his back, right-handed, standing relaxed but with his weight on his front leg, ready for battle. The second, shorter in stature, broad shoulders, a short sword at his belt, left-handed, standing slightly behind the first, covering the flank. The third, of medium height, no visible weapon, arms hanging loosely at his sides. But Do Kwon noticed a bulge on his right forearm beneath the sleeve, a hidden blade. This third man was the most dangerous. The wagon train came to a stop. The first mercenary approached and said the road was blocked. He said they'd have to pay 10 silver coins to pass. Old Park placed his hand on his saber. His father stood up from the wagon. His face was calm, but Do Kwon saw the muscles in his neck tense. Nam Sung Ho was a warrior, not a great one, but an honest one. He could handle one mercenary, maybe two, but not three. Do Kwon sat in the wagon next to the sleeping Dawes and thought quickly. A fight was out of the question. His father and Old Park against three professionals. The outcome was predictable. Paying 10 silver coins was a quarter of a month's income from the water. Plus, it would set a precedent. Pay once, and they'd all demand it. Do Kwon jumped down from the cart. He walked over to his father. He tugged at his sleeve. His father looked down. The boy was staring at him, his lips moving almost silently. He said one sentence, quietly, so that only his father could hear. He said that the one in the middle, unarmed, was more dangerous than the others. That he had a blade in his right sleeve, and that if his father looked at his feet, he'd see that the man was standing in line with the wagon. One move, and he'd be at the horses. His father froze. He looked at the third mercenary. He saw it. The bulge on his forearm, his stance, the line leading to the horses. The boy was right. The third one was preparing for a different scenario. While the first two distract attention, the third cuts the horse's reins. The wagon train comes to a halt. They rob it calmly. My father straightened up. He stepped forward. His voice changed. It grew deeper, harsher. He said he was the head of the Nam clan, that the caravan was traveling on the clan's road, that if the three respected travelers wished to pass through Nam lands, they could ask the elder for permission in the Yonggok Valley. The first mercenary smirked. He began to say that the Nam clan had long since ceased to be a threat to anyone. My father cut him off. He said he could see a blade in the right sleeve of their companion. If he took a step toward the horses, the conversation would end, and not in the guest's favor. The third mercenary flinched. His hand twitched involuntarily toward his sleeve. He hadn't expected to be exposed. Silence hung in the air. The first mercenary stopped smirking. He looked at the third man, at his father, at Old Pak, whose hand was already resting on the hilt of his saber, at the wagons. He was weighing his options. 3 against 2. But the element of surprise was lost. The hidden blade had been revealed. That meant the plan wouldn't work. That meant it would come down to open combat. And in open combat, on a mountain pass, with wagons and horses, nothing is certain. The first mercenary nodded. He said there had been a misunderstanding, that they were just passing by. They turned around and headed up the slope. A minute later, they disappeared around a bend. The wagon train moved on. My father walked beside the wagon and said nothing. Half an hour, when the pass was far behind them, he turned to Do Kwon. The boy was sitting in the wagon, braiding a pigtail for Dasom, who had just woken up. His father looked at him for a long time. Then he turned away. He didn't say anything. But Do Kwon saw his hands. His fists were clenched so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. His father was afraid. Not of the mercenaries, of his son. Of what lay within his son. Of what shouldn't be there. Do Kwon continued to braid the pigtail. His hands didn't tremble. His mind was working. He had revealed too much. An 8-year-old boy who can see a hidden blade 200 paces away, that's not a talent. It's an impossibility. He should have kept quiet. But then there would have been a fight, and his father might not have returned. And Dasom would have woken up in an overturned wagon. There was no choice. The braid turned out even. Dasom said it was better than Mom's today, for the first time. The 6th month. After the incident at the pass, his father had changed. He hadn't become colder. He didn't pull away. But Do Kwon could sense it. The glances, the long, silent glances when his father thought his son wasn't looking. the questions that hung in the air but were never spoken aloud. His mother had changed too. She began to sit next to Do Kwon more often. She would stroke his head more often, ask him more often how he'd slept. It wasn't tenderness, it was a test. She was looking for something in him, signs of possession, strange behavior, a foreign gaze in familiar eyes. In Hwando, they knew about such things. Spirits would possess children. Demons would take over weak bodies. A child would change overnight. He'd start saying things he couldn't possibly know, doing things he couldn't possibly do. And then a priest would come with a red ribbon and a sack of ashes, and they'd take the child away. Do Kwon understood their fear, and he did everything he could to allay it. He started playing more. With Das. With the other children. He ran around the yard. He caught bugs. He knocked over his bowl of porridge at breakfast. He laughed loudly and awkwardly, the way 8-year-olds do. He did silly things. On purpose. Calculatedly. Every silly act was a mask. Every childish gesture told his parents, "Look, I'm your son. I'm just a regular boy. Don't be afraid." After 2 weeks, his mother stopped checking up on him. His father stopped peeking from around the corner. The mask had worked. But it left a lingering taste, the bitter taste of a lie. In his past life, he had never pretended. With Gyung-ho, he was who he was, a master, a teacher, an old man who spoke the truth even when the truth was inconvenient. In this life, he lied every day, every minute. He lied with his face, his voice, his body. He lied to the people who loved him. And it was necessary. But that didn't make it any easier. The training continued. In the 6th month, he moved on to combinations. 2 strikes in a single motion, a vertical strike transitioning into a horizontal one, a horizontal strike transitioning into a diagonal one. Each combination took 10 days to master. His body resisted. The muscles of an 8-year-old child couldn't perform what the mind of a 60-year-old master remembered. He adapted every technique to fit this small body. He adjusted the angles. He shortened the range of motion. He shifted the center of gravity lower. What had been a shoulder strike in his past life became a hip strike in this one. What had been a step became a half step. What had been a single movement became 2 short ones. It was harder than teaching a technique from scratch. It was like rewriting a book in another language while preserving the meaning of every word. But he did it. Every morning, quietly, alone. The students were improving. Eugene, a left-hander, became the best among the juniors in terms of the precision of his strikes. His left hand moved as if he had never held a sword in his right. His back was straight. His shoulders were level. Tae-yoon watched him and shook his head in amazement. Jin-woo continued to visit Do-hwan in the evenings. Now he wasn't just repeating the moves, he was asking questions. Why was the stance like this and not another? Why was the breathing in 2 counts and not 3? Why, when striking from above, did one need to relax the neck rather than tense it? Do-hwan answered briefly, simply, without theory. Because the body works better when it isn't hindered. Jin-woo pondered every answer. This guy wasn't a genius, but he was stubborn, diligent, willing to work hard. In a past life, people like him made the best soldiers. Not generals, but the ones the generals rely on. In the 20th week, a second letter arrived. Not from the merchant, from the So clan. The letter was addressed to his mother, Mrs. So Ha-yeon. His mother read it in her room, alone. Do Kwon didn't see the contents, but he saw her face when she came out. White, like paper. Her hands hidden in her sleeves so no one would see them trembling. That evening, his parents talked behind a closed door, for a long time. Do Kwon sat in his room and listened, not to the words, to the tone. His mother's voice, low, tense. His father's voice, muffled, heavy. They were arguing, quietly, without shouting, the way people argue when they're not afraid of each other but of what's standing behind the door. The next morning, his mother came out for breakfast as usual. She was smiling. She served Do Juan his bowl. She braided Dasso's hair. Everything was as usual, but Do Juan saw it. The shadow beneath her smile, the tension in her wrists. She was holding the chopsticks a little tighter than necessary. The So clan knew about them. Someone had told them. A servant, a merchant from Cheongju, a guest from the Min clan who had noticed the students' growth. It didn't matter who. The information had spread, and the So clan, which had struck their daughter's name from the rolls 10 years ago, suddenly remembered that she had a son. Do Juan didn't ask his mother. Not now. She'd tell him when she was ready, or when she had no choice left. He knew the So clan, from a past life. He knew their methods. First, a letter, then gifts, then an invitation to visit, then gentle pressure, then harsh pressure. They don't wage open war against small clans. They absorb them, quietly, like family. They send a teacher. They take the child away for training. The child returns 5 years later and is no longer one of the Nam. He is a So. His body is Nam, but his technique, the school of communication, and his way of thinking, all are So. The donor clan quietly dies out, without war, without shame. It simply dissolves. Dokvan won't let this happen, but right now there was nothing he could do. He was 8 years old. He had no say in clan affairs, no right to counsel, no influence. All he could do was train, prepare the students, wait, and hope he'd have enough time. In the 22nd week, he began working with Das in earnest. Before that, it had just been playing with a ball. Now he'd added a second exercise, shadows. He'd stand in a stance in front of her and make a movement, slowly. She had to repeat it. Not a strike, a movement, a shift of weight, a turn of the hips, a tilt of the torso. Basic body mechanics without a weapon. Dassom didn't understand why. She wanted to swing a sword like Jin Woo. She wanted to strike a stance. She wanted to be a warrior, not a shadow. Do Juan told her that the fastest warrior in the world is the one who moves before they think. That the body must know the movement before the mind commands it. That if she learned to move like a shadow, then when the time came for the sword, it would become an extension of her body, not just a stick in her hand. Dassom puckered her lips. Then she repeated the movement, awkwardly. Then again. Better. Then once more. By the end of the first lesson, she was mimicking him with a half-second delay. For a 6-year-old, that was impossibly fast. Do Kwon watched her and thought, she doesn't know. No one knows. But in 3 years, when the heirs tournament demands everything the Nam clan has, this little girl with the pigtail, which her older brother braids for her, will be one of the reasons the clan survives. Not because she'll be fighting in the arena, but because she'll be standing right beside him, and a single glance at her will be enough for Do Kwon to remember why he's doing all this. The 7th month, the first snow. The Yongok mountain valley turned white overnight. Morning training moved to the dojo. The courtyard was covered with a crust of ice, and running on it had become dangerous. Du Huan ran anyway, until dawn, through the snow, barefoot. Not to toughen himself up, for the sake of his feet. The snow and ice forced his toes to grip the ground. The muscles in his feet, which usually lay dormant in shoes, awakened and began to work. After a month of such runs, his feet would be like tree roots, steady, tenacious, and strong. This wasn't in the textbooks. It came from his own experience. 40 years ago, a young So Gyung-ho trained in the snow on the northern mountain passes, and realized that the cold teaches the body better than any mentor. His mother saw his wet footprints on the porch and scolded him. She brought him a hot herbal decoction and wrapped his feet in warm cloths. He drank the decoction and allowed himself to be the child his mother was tending to. It wasn't an act. It was genuine. In the 28th week, a farmer arrived from a neighboring village. At night, he pounded on the clan's gate until they opened it. His wife had been in labor for 3 days. The midwife had done everything she could and said there was nothing more she could do. The baby was in the wrong position. The woman was dying. The father went out to meet the farmer. He listened. He looked at Taiyun. Taiyun shook his head. There was no doctor in the clan. There was a herbalist, Old Park, who knew which roots to brew for a cold, but he didn't know how to deliver a baby. Du Huan stood in the doorway and listened. He wasn't a doctor. In his past life, he had been a master swordsman, but 30 years in the Imperial Guard wasn't just about swords and stances. It was about night marches when soldiers collapsed from exhaustion and had to be helped back on their feet. It was about field camps where there were no doctors and the commander had to bandage a wound and stop the bleeding himself. It meant dozens of times when he sat beside a wounded man and taught him how to breathe so his body wouldn't go into shock. Breathing. He couldn't turn the baby in the womb. He couldn't do what a doctor does. But he could teach the woman how to breathe properly so that her body would relax, so that the muscles would stop tensing up from fear and pain, so that the baby could find its way out. He went out to his father. He said he would go. His father looked down at him. An 8-year-old boy in a nightshirt, barefoot in the snow, says he'll go to the woman in labor. His father said no. Du Huan said he knew how to teach people to breathe, that breathing helps with pain, that he wouldn't be treating her. He'd just show her how to breathe. His father was silent. Taiyun stood nearby. He'd seen what Do Kwan's breathing did. After 3 months of morning practice, he himself had stopped gasping for breath. His knee hurt less, his core had grown stronger, just from breathing. Taiyun looked at his brother and nodded. His father clenched his teeth. He said he would go with him. They walked through the snow for half an hour. Father carried Du Huan on his shoulders for the last 10 minutes because the boy had started stumbling from the cold. The village was small, 5 houses. A light was on in the one at the far end. Inside it was hot and smelled of blood and sweat. A woman lay on a mat, pale. Her eyes were closed. Her breathing was ragged and raspy. The midwife sat nearby, her hands and face wet with the sweat of someone who had already given up. Dokvan crouched down next to the woman. He placed his palm on her hand. Her hand was ice cold despite the heat in the room. Her body was going into shock. He began to speak, quietly, calmly, in a voice that didn't belong to a child, in a voice that had been helping wounded guardsmen get back on their feet for 30 years. He told her to breathe. Not just to breathe with him, together. Inhale for a count of 4, hold for a count of 2, exhale for 6. He counted aloud, monotonously, rhythmically, like a metronome. The woman didn't hear him for the first 5 minutes. Then she began to hear him. Her breathing became more even. Not right away, little by little. Her inhales grew longer. Her exhales grew deeper. Her body began to relax. Her abdominal muscles, which had been clenched with pain and fear, began to ease. He sat beside her for 3 hours. For 3 hours he counted aloud and held her hand. At first, the midwife looked at the boy as if he were crazy. Then she saw that the woman's breathing had evened out, that the color had returned to her face, that her hands had warmed up. Toward the end of the 3rd hour, the baby turned. The midwife felt it with her hands, and her eyes widened. She said the head was in place, that it was time to push. Dokvan changed the rhythm. Inhale for 2 counts, a short pause, then exhale with a push. The woman breathed in sync with him. 20 minutes later, the baby was born. Alive. A cry pierced the silence of the house, the thin, high-pitched cry of a newborn. The midwife took the baby, cut the umbilical cord, wiped the baby down, and placed the baby on the mother's chest. The woman was crying. The peasant stood in the doorway, weeping. The father stood behind Dokwan, looking at his son. Dokwan stood up. His legs wouldn't hold him. 3 hours on his knees on the cold floor had drained everything from the child's body. His head was spinning. His vision was blurry. He made it to the door. He stepped out onto the porch. The snow was falling thick and silent. He took 2 steps and sat down in the snow. He just sat down. Because his legs had given out. The cold burned through the thin fabric. He closed his eyes and thought he would fall asleep right then. And he did. His father found him a minute later. He lifted him into his arms. The boy weighed as little as an empty sack, light and warm in the cold air. His father held him close to his chest and walked home, through the snow, through the dark valley. A farmer stood on his porch and watched them go. The midwife stood nearby. She said that in 30 years of work, she had never seen anything like it, that the boy had done what she had been unable to, that he hadn't treated her, he had taught her, taught the woman's body to do what it had forgotten out of fear. The father carried his son home and said nothing. Dokvan slept on his shoulder. In his sleep, he smiled, not a forced smile, a real smile, because that night he had saved 2 lives. Not with a sword, not with mana, not with technique, with his breath. The very same breath he used to heal the Emperor's guards, with which he raised the wounded, with which he kept himself on his feet when his lungs were failing. Breath. The simplest thing in the world. The most important. In the morning, his mother found them at the gate. His father was standing there with his son in his arms and couldn't open the bolt because his hands were full. Das ran out barefoot through the snow and shouted that her brother had returned. His mother took Dokvan from his father's arms, carried him into the house, laid him down. She tucked him in. She sat beside him until he woke up around lunchtime. When he opened his eyes, she was looking at him, without fear, without suspicion, with something else, something he saw for the first time in her eyes. Pride. 3 days later, a farmer came from the village. He brought a sack of rice and a bundle of dried fish. He bowed to his father, touching his forehead to the ground. Then he bowed to Dokwan. The boy was standing in the courtyard with a wooden sword in his hand. The peasant was twice his height. He knelt in the snow and bowed to the child. The whole courtyard saw it. A week later, 2 men from another village came to Yongguk. One had a sore back. The other had had a cough for a month that wouldn't go away. They asked about the boy who knew how to teach people to breathe. Dokwan didn't treat them. He wasn't a doctor. But he showed each of them one breathing exercise, a simple one, for the back, for the lungs. They left. 2 weeks later, they returned. The back pain had eased, the cough was gone. They brought 3 more people with them. Word had spread, not about a warrior, not about a master swordsman, about a boy from the Nam clan who teaches people how to breathe. The 8th month, the end of winter. Snow still lay on the peaks, but in the valley it was already melting. Streams ran down the slopes, and by noon the clan's courtyard had turned into a muddy mess. Dokwan trained in the morning while the ground was still frozen. 90 sword strikes, 5 types. He added the 5th type last week. The thrust, the most precise strike, the most dangerous. In his past life, Seo Gyung-ho had won with the thrust more often than with any other strike. Not because the thrust is powerful, Because the thrust is fast, and because most fighters in Huando don't know how to defend against it. Everyone learns slashing techniques. They consider thrusting to be the weapon of spearmen. Swordsmen disregard it, and they're wrong to do so. Running, 15 laps. Breathing, 1 hour and 15 minutes. His body had changed. Not on the outside. His arms were still thin, he was still short. But beneath the skin was a different child. His muscles were dense and stiff as ropes. His tendons were strong. His reflexes were sharp. He could now catch a fly in mid-air. Not bragging, practice. Once, a fly landed on Da Som's nose during dinner, and Do Kwon caught it with 2 fingers before his sister had a chance to sneeze. Da Som squealed with delight. Mother shook her head. Father watched. In the 26th week, 2 events occurred. First, a second envelope arrived from the So clan. This time, it wasn't a letter, it was gifts. A piece of silk for Mother, a set of brushes for Do Kwon, and a toy horse for Da Som. And a note. Short, polite. The So clan invited their nephew to visit during summer vacation, to see the capital, to meet relatives. Her mother read the note and her hands hid in her sleeves again. Her father silently put the gifts away in a chest. Da Som never got the horse. Do Kwon saw everything. The So clan was stepping up its efforts. The first letter was a test. The gifts were the second step. The invitation to visit was the third. Next would come pressure, gentle at first, then harsh. He had to act. But what could an 8-year-old boy do against the great clan? Nothing. Nothing yet. The second event was more frightening. A traveler arrived at the edge of the Yonggok Valley. A man in his 40s, of average height, plain clothes, a staff in his hand, a knapsack on his back. He called himself a wandering master from the western provinces. He said he was looking for work. He could teach children the basics of combat in exchange for food and shelter. Such people often traveled through Huangdo, masters without a clan, without a school, without ties. They went from village to village and taught in exchange for lodging. Some were good, some were mediocre. Some were not what they seemed. Do Kwon saw him in the courtyard. The wanderer was talking to Tae Yun. He was smiling, gesturing, saying all the right things. Do Kwon watched him for 10 seconds, and a chill crept inside him. This man was no wandering master. His stance, the way he stood, with his weight evenly distributed on both feet. His back was straight but not tense. His arms were relaxed. He held the staff in his right hand, but not the way a traveler holds a walking stick. He held it the way a fighter holds a weapon. His fingers gripped the shaft at its center of balance. No higher, no lower. It was a habit developed through years of training with a combat staff. His eyes. He was smiling at Tae Yun, but his eyes were moving, scanning the courtyard, counting people, marking exits, assessing. He was no wanderer. He was a scout. Whoever had sent him to observe the Nam clan from the inside, the Crimson Lotus, the So clan, or someone else. It didn't matter. What mattered was that he was here. Do Kwon didn't approach him. He didn't show himself. He went around the corner of the dojo and crouched down. He thought, if he chased the stranger away, it would attract attention. That meant he'd been sent for a reason. That means there's something to hide. If he took in the stranger would live within the clan, watching, listening, taking stock. In a month, whoever sent him would know everything about the Nam clan. Every student, every weakness, every secret. A third option. Take in the stranger and show him exactly what's necessary. No more, no less. Show him a small, weak clan. 4 children with wooden swords, an old mentor with bad knees, a clan leader who can barely make ends meet. Show him the truth, but not the whole truth. Hide Jinu. Hide the student's height. Hide the morning training sessions. Hide everything that matters. And let the scout return with his report. The Nam clan. Weak. Dying. Not worth paying attention to. Dokwan returned to the courtyard. The stranger had already gone to speak with his father. That evening, his father announced that the wandering master Ho Sang-jin would stay with the clan for a month. He'll help with training. Taiyun nodded. He was glad for the help. Extra hands in the dojo never hurt. Du-hwan said nothing. That night, he didn't sleep. He lay there and thought. The plan was risky. If the wanderer was too clever, he'd see through the mask. He'd see that the students were better than they appeared. He'd see that the boy wasn't who he claimed to be. But there was no choice. The next morning, Du-hwan went to see Taiyun before practice. He said he wasn't feeling well, that his head was spinning, that it might be a cold. Taiyun felt his forehead. It was cold. Du-hwan wasn't lying. He hadn't slept all night and was indeed feeling a little queasy. Taiyun told the boy to lie down. Du-hwan lay down. He skipped the morning practice for the first time in 3 months. Then he went to see Jin-woo. He took him aside and said that as long as the guest was staying with the clan, there would be no evening practice. Jin-woo didn't ask why. He nodded. Then Du-hwan found Yu-jin. He told him the same thing. While the guest is here, train as you did before with your right hand. Yu-jin looked at him. His eyes widened. It had been 2 weeks since he'd switched to his left, and every strike had been a joy. And now the boy was telling him to go back to his right hand. Du-hwan placed his hand on his shoulder and said it wouldn't be for long, that the guest would leave in a month and then everything would go back to normal. Yu-jin didn't understand, but he obeyed. The next day, Ho Sang-jin led the first training session with the younger students. Du-hwan sat on a bench and watched. He pretended to be sick. He wrapped himself in a blanket. He coughed, the mask of a frail child. The stranger taught the basics: stances, strikes, blocks. He taught well. Not bad. Not brilliant. The typical level of a provincial master. But his eyes were working. He looked at every student and assessed them. Du-hwan saw it, because he'd been doing the same thing his whole life. After a week, Sang-jin relaxed. He saw what Du-hwan wanted him to see. A small clan, weak children, an old mentor, an heir with an empty mana vessel who gets sick every week. Hopeless. Sang-jin became less cautious. He started going for walks through the valley. He was drawing something in a small notebook. A map. Du-hwan had caught a glimpse of it once out of the corner of his eye. A map of the Yonggok Valley. With markings, trails, water sources, approaches from the north and east. A military map. That meant the Crimson Lotus. The So clan wouldn't have drawn a map. They operate differently. A map is needed by someone planning to come by force. In the 3rd week, Sanjin began to pack up. He said it was time for him to move on. He thanked them for the hospitality. He bowed to his father. He ruffled Du-hwan's hair. The boy coughed in response. Sanjin smiled and left. 2 days after his departure, Du-hwan gathered Taiyun and Jin-woo at the dojo that evening. He closed the door. He looked at both of them, and he said that the wandering master Ho Sang-jin wasn't a wandering master at all, that he was a scout, that in his knapsack lay a map of the valley marked with military landmarks. Taiyun turned pale. Jin-woo clenched his fists. Dokwan raised his hand. He said there was no need to panic, that the scout had seen what he was supposed to see: a weak clan, weak children, nothing of interest. His report would tell those who sent him that the Nam clan could be taken over at any moment, that there was no need to rush, that they could wait for the tournament and take everything by legal means. This gave the clan time. 2 years until the tournament. 2 years to become what the Nam clan was not yet. Taiyun looked at the boy, an 8-year-old who had just described a reconnaissance operation and countermeasures like a general at a war council. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. He asked how the boy knew the wanderer was a scout. Du Huan said he'd seen the way he held his staff, that only those who'd trained with a combat staff held it that way, and that wandering masters don't draw maps. Taiyun was silent. Jinwu was silent. They looked at him, and in their eyes, Du Huan saw what he had seen in his father's eyes after the mountain pass. Fear. Not malicious fear. Confused fear. The fear of people who don't understand what stands before them. Du Huan stood up. He bowed to both of them. He said he had to go. Da Som was waiting for her braid before bed. He left the dojo. Behind him, Taiyun and Jinwu sat in silence, staring at the closed door. The 9th month. After the scout left, Du Huan took off his masks. Not all of them, but the main one. He went to his father, sat down across from him, looked him in the eyes, and said that the Nam clan needed a school. Not a clan, a school. His father was silent. Do Huan spoke. He said that the Nam clan would never become a great clan. They had no bloodline, no celestial technicians, no army, no money, no connections. They would lose a war to any of the 9 great clans. They would even lose to the Crimson Lotus. But a school is different. A school doesn't wage war. A school teaches. A school cannot be destroyed by the sword because knowledge lives in the minds of its students. Burn down the building. They'll build a new one. Kill the teacher. His methods are already recorded in the scrolls and live on in the muscles of those he has taught. The school is immortal. The clan is mortal. His father listened. His face remained unchanged, but Do Huan saw the fingers on his knees slowly unclench. The boy was saying things he couldn't possibly know, but the boy was speaking the truth, and his father could feel it. Do Huan continued. He said that the school must accept everyone, not just children from the clans, peasant children, orphans, runaways, those with small mana reservoirs, those expelled from other schools for lack of talent. Precisely these ones. Because Do Huan has a method that works without a large mana reservoir. A method that allows the weak to defeat the strong. Not with strength, not with mana, with technique, with breathing, with precision, with knowledge of one's own body. Father asked where the boy had learned this method. Do Huan told the truth, partially. He said that when he was sick and running a fever for 3 days, an old man came to him in a dream. That the old man showed him things, many things, more than he could explain. That he didn't know who this old man was. Maybe a clan ancestor, maybe a mountain spirit, maybe just a dream. But the method works. Taiyun will confirm it. Jinwu will confirm it. Yu Jin will confirm it. His father was silent for a long time. Then he stood up. He left the room. Do Huan sat alone and waited. An hour later, his father returned, with Taiyun. They sat down across from the boy. Taiyun spoke first. He said the boy was right, that in 6 months the clan's students had grown more than they had in the previous 3 years, that his own body had changed, that the breathing technique the boy had taught him wasn't just an exercise. It was a different way of living in one's body, that he didn't understand where an 8-year-old child had gotten it from, but that it was real. Father listened to his brother. He looked at his son, then he said one word, All right. That's how the idea for the Yong-uk School was born. Not the school itself, the idea. There were 2 years and 2 months left until the heirs tournament. The clan had to survive first, then prove it had a right to exist, then open its doors. Tokwon drew up a plan, not on paper, in his head. He couldn't write down the plan because an 8-year-old boy doesn't write strategic documents. But he could provide direction through his father, through Tae-yoon, through his mother. The first step? Training sessions were doubled. The younger ones in the morning, the older ones in the evening. Jinwoo earned the right to train openly with Dokwon. Tae-yoon led the main program. Tokwon corrected each student individually. Yoojin returned to using her left hand. Dasom continued her shadowboxing exercises. Step 2. Money. The water trade provided a steady income. Tokwon encouraged his father to expand, not the water business, but the herb trade. The Yong-uk mountain valley stretched across slopes warmed by the morning sun and shaded by the afternoon. Ideal conditions for medicinal herbs. Tokwon knew this because in his past life, a physician in the Imperial Guard had explained to him which herbs grew where when they were camped together in the northern mountains. He told his mother that he had seen beautiful flowers on the eastern slope. His mother went out to look. She returned with an armful of wild ginseng. Her eyes were ablaze. Wild ginseng from the mountain valley was 10 times more expensive than mineral water. Step 3. People. The clan needed new students, not from clan families, from outside the clan. Tokwon waited. He knew people would come on their own. After the incident with the woman in labor, word of the boy who taught breathing had spread throughout the 3 villages surrounding the valley. By the end of the 9th month, 2 or 3 people were coming to Yong-uk every week. For breathing exercises, for advice, for help. Among them were parents with children, children who hadn't been accepted into the schools of the major clans, children with small mana vessels, children who'd been told they were useless. Dokwon looked at each one for 10 seconds, and he saw. This boy, 12 years old, his mana vessel was 1/3 the normal size, but he had quick feet and a sharp gaze. He'd make a fine scout. This girl, 11 years old, her mana vessel was almost empty, just like Dokwon's. But she has perfect hearing. She hears footsteps behind the wall. She hears an enemy's breathing at the far end of the courtyard. She'll make an unrivaled sentry. This boy, 13 years old, big, slow, clumsy. Every school turned him down, but his hands, broad palms, thick, strong fingers. He can bend a horseshoe. He doesn't need a sword. He needs a shield. A big, heavy shield with which he can block 3 attackers without getting tired. Dokwon didn't take them on as apprentices. He couldn't. He's 8 years old. He has no right to recruit apprentices. But he spoke to his father, quietly, over dinner, between spoonfuls of porridge, that the boy with the quick feet could help out in the courtyard, that the girl with the keen hearing could keep an eye on the granary, that the big guy could work in the smithy. His father listened. He understood. He agreed. By the end of the 10th month, 4 new people were living in the Nam clan. Not students, workers, helpers. But every evening, Tae-yoon led them through basic training, just so they wouldn't get bored, just to keep their bodies moving. And Do-hwan would quietly approach each one after training and correct one small detail. Just one, no more. One small detail every day. A month later, the 4 newcomers moved with more confidence than most students at provincial schools, and no one but Do-hwan understood why. Year 1. 12 months since his awakening. Do-hwan stood in the courtyard and looked at what he had built. 12 students, 4 old ones, 4 new ones. 4 who had arrived over the past 2 months. Among the latter was a 13-year-old girl from So-yoon. She had appeared at night, wet, hungry, with a sword at her belt and bruises on her wrists. Her mother saw her first, opened the door, let her in, poured her some hot herbal tea, wrapped her up warm. The girl was silent for an hour. Then she spoke. So Yuna, from the So clan, from a collateral branch, Dowan's cousin on his mother's side. She was being married off to the heir of the Moon clan to strengthen a trade alliance. She was 13 years old and was being married off to a 40-year-old man who had already buried 2 wives. She ran away, over the mountains. She walked through the snow for 3 days. The only person she knew outside the So clan was Aunt Hyon, Duhwan's mother. His mother sat next to her and stroked her head. Her face was stony. Duhwan stood in the doorway and watched. So Yuna. He was seeing her for the first time. Thin, tall for a 13-year-old. Short hair. She'd cut it on the road so it wouldn't get in the way. Her hands, calloused. The hands of someone who wields a sword every day. She stands tall. Even sitting on the floor, wrapped in a blanket and shivering from the cold, she sits with her back straight. The posture of the So clan. The same as her mother's, but sharper, stiffer. This isn't a woman who left the sword for a family. This is a girl who lives by the sword. Dokwan looked at her for 10 seconds and saw it. Left-handed. She's been retrained to use her right hand, but her body remembers. Her shoulders are turned slightly more to the left than they should be. Her hips are asymmetrical. Her left hand is stronger than her right. She was retrained, but not completely. And that means she fights worse than she's capable of. Significantly worse. Also, she stutters. When she started talking about the escape, her voice stumbled on every third word. Not because of the cold. It's a habit. It's the kind of stutter that develops when a child is cut off mid-sentence too often. She's afraid to speak in front of strangers. He went to his room. He lay down. He thought. Su Yun is both a gift and a problem. A gift because she's the heir to the So clan's heavenly technique, a technique passed down through blood. If she stays with the Nam clan, and if Du Huan can adapt this technique to her natural left-handed stance, she'll become the strongest fighter the Nam clan has ever seen. A problem because the So clan will be looking for her. A fugitive heiress with the heavenly technique in her blood is not something the Great Clan would let go. They will come. The only question is when. The next morning, Du Huan went out into the courtyard early. Yuna was already there. She was standing at the training stand, sword in her right hand. She was striking, strike after strike, fast, powerful, technical. The So clan's heavenly technique. Du Huan had seen it 3 times in his past life, on the battlefield, from a distance, beautiful and deadly. And now it was right in front of him, in the hands of a 13-year-old girl who was shivering from the cold and hadn't slept all night. Even in that state, her technique was flawless. The lines were precise, the transitions were smooth. But everything was in her right hand. Everything went over her right shoulder. Everything went through her right leg. Half her strength was being drained by the struggle against her own body. He approached. He stood beside her. She noticed him and stopped. She looked down at him. An 8-year-old boy in a nightshirt stood next to her in the courtyard at dawn. She asked what he wanted. Her voice was sharp, defensive. Her stutter was hidden behind her harshness. Dokvan didn't say anything. He picked up a small wooden sword in his left hand. He assumed a stance, a mirror stance, left-sided, and performed the first movement of the Heavenly So technique, slowly, with his left hand, over his left shoulder, past his left leg. Yuna froze. Her mouth fell open, her eyes widened. She recognized the movement. It was her movement, her clan's technique, but mirrored, left-handed. No such version existed. The So clan had taught only the right-handed version. For 300 years, left-handers were retrained or weeded out. No one had ever rewritten the heavenly technique for the left hand. Until this morning. Do Kwon made a second movement, a third, a fourth, each with his left hand. Each was a mirror image of the original, but not just a reflection. He had seen in his past life how this technique worked and understood its logic. He understood which movements changed when reversed and which remained the same. He understood where the mirror image was exact and where correction was needed. He had rewritten the 4 movements in his head in a single night, not on paper, in his head. And now he was demonstrating them to the girl standing before him, holding her breath. He stopped after the 4th movement. He lowered his sword. He turned to her and said one sentence. "What's your favorite tea?" Yuna blinked. That wasn't the question she'd been expecting. She'd been expecting questions about the technique, about the So clan, about the escape, about why she was here. But the boy asked about tea. She said jasmine, quietly, without stuttering. Do Kwon nodded. He said he'd brew some for her after practice, and that if she wanted, he'd show her the rest of the moves, with his left hand. Yuna stood there for another minute. Then she switched the sword to her left hand. For the first time in her life. Her body exhaled. Her shoulders settled evenly. Her back straightened. Her hips aligned. She raised the sword and made her first move, with her left. The strike was twice as powerful as her best strike with her right. Twice as powerful. She lowered the sword. She looked at her left hand, and her eyes filled with tears. Do Hwan turned away. He walked toward the kitchen to brew some jasmine tea. Behind him, a 13-year-old girl stood in the courtyard with a sword in her left hand, crying. Quietly. Silently. For the first time in 3 years. The second year. The Yonggok school opened quietly, without ceremony, without announcements. One morning, her father simply hung a wooden sign on the valley gate. Yonggok Martial Arts School, accepting students. No one came the first week, nor the second. On the 3rd week, a 14-year-old boy arrived with a bruised face and a sack on his back. He'd been expelled from the Hong clan's school for hitting a senior student who was bullying the younger ones. His name was Kang Tae-so. Big, clumsy, below average mana capacity. His hands were like shovels. Du-hwan looked at him for 10 seconds and saw a shield formation fighter. Tae-so became the first official student of the Yonggok school. Over the next 3 months, 16 more people arrived. Among them was 15-year-old Baek Ha-ri, the daughter of a bankrupt merchant. She brought her younger brother as payment a debt. She stayed because she had nowhere else to go. She was no warrior, but Du-hwan saw something else in her. She could calculate in her head faster than any adult he had met in his 2 lifetimes. He asked his father to entrust her with the school's ledgers. His father was surprised. Then he agreed. A month later, Hari found 3 loopholes in the expenses through which the clan was losing 12 silver coins every month. She plugged the holes, silently, without thanks. Dakwon signed the first contract with a rice supplier in her name, not her father's. She read her signature on the paper. She looked at the boy, and for the first time in a year, she smiled. Then Yoon Mi-suk arrived, 16 years old, a nun from the Silent Pond Mountain Monastery. She came in response to a sign. The old abbess had seen a boy in a dream who breathed like a mountain. Mi-suk was a healer, a rare gift. Her mana healed through touch. But it took away her own years of life. Every healing cost her months. She came to Yongok and saw Du Huan. She looked at him for a long time. Then she sat down across from him and said he wasn't a child. Du Huan froze. He was the first person to say it out loud. Misuk didn't press him for details. She said she could sense it, that his breath was old. Not sick, just old. Like a tree that had grown for 100 years. She had the gift of a healer. She could sense bodies, and his body was telling her that inside lived someone who had lived a very long life. Du Huan was silent for a minute. Then he said he couldn't explain it, that it was true, that he wasn't a demon or possessed, that he was simply a man who'd been given a second chance, and that if she told anyone, it would all be over. Misuk nodded. She said her job was to heal, not to judge. She stayed. Do Wan developed a breathing technique for her. It took 3 weeks of work. Every evening, he sat with her and fine-tuned the rhythm, a rhythm at which her mana flowed through her hands without draining her life. The principle was simple. Misuk was wasting her life force because she didn't know how to separate mana from life. She opened the gate completely and everything poured out at once, mana and life together. Do Kwon taught her to open the gate just a quarter of the way. Let only mana through, hold back life. It was the same as breathing, control, rhythm, micro-pauses. In the 4th week, Misuk healed a boy from the village's broken arm, without pain, without losing a single day of life. Afterward, she sat in the courtyard and looked at her palms. For 10 years, she had feared her gift. For 10 years, every healing had been a sacrifice. But now, she could heal and live. She looked at Dokwan, who was sitting nearby, braiding Dasso's hair, and her gaze, quiet, deep. The gaze of someone who had found land after 10 years at sea. Then Cha Eun-bi arrived, 17 years old, a former bodyguard to a nobleman, a scar across her eyebrow, short hair, hands that could bend an iron rod. She left her post when she was ordered to kill a child. She refused. She was declared a traitor. She wandered aimlessly for 2 months until she heard about a school in the mountains that accepts everyone, then went there. She stood at the gate. She said she knew how to fight and that she needed a job. Da Quan came out to meet her. He looked up at her. She was twice his height and 3 times his width. He said there was a job, school security, and one more thing, teaching self-defense to the younger girls. Eun-bi frowned. She said she wasn't a teacher, that she was a weapon. Da Quan said that a weapon in the hands of a master is a tool, and a tool can be taught to be a teacher. Eun-bi said, "Tch," and stayed. A week later, it was raining. Eun-bi was standing guard at the gate. Night, cold. Water ran down her face, and her scar glistened in the lantern light. Da Quan came out of the house with a pot of hot soup. Silently, he set it down next to her. Silently, he left. Eun-bi looked at the pot, at the small barefoot footprints in the mud, leading back to the house. At the soup, steam rising from it. She didn't know whether to cry or laugh. She chose the soup. Hwan So-yun was the last to arrive, 14 years old, cheerful, chatty. She loved sweets. Her father had sent a letter to Du Hwan's father. A polite, respectful. He asked that his daughter be accepted as a student. The father's name? Hwan Ui. Du Hwan read the name, and the world stood still. Hwan Ui. His student. His traitor. The man he had taught for 20 years,